Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for today's SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and over the next half hour, we're going to take a look at three important questions we're hearing from international educators this week. Before we get to that, we do want to say a special shout out to all of you who are watching live on Facebook and also those listening to us on the podcast. And as we mentioned this past week, we're now on Amazon Music so if you get your podcast there, you'll be able to download us. Just search for Midweek Roundup, and you'll be able to find the podcast version of this live chat there. We're also happy to have those of you who are watching on repeat on Facebook, on our Facebook page, or on our YouTube channel. Always a pleasure to provide this content for you weekly to show you our analysis on some of the key issues of our day in international education. This week is no exception for providing some entertainment in terms of beyond the presidential debate last night, which we all would rather forget, I'm sure. We have news that's coming thick and fast when it comes to impacts of court rulings on proposed bans and proposals to change other immigration-related policies. So we'll be taking a look at this and a couple of others and providing some global context as well, which is always important when we talk about the impact of what we do in international education and our place in the world, larger world of global student mobility. So let's get right at it with the first look at where we stand with TikTok and WeChat. And if you remember, a few weeks ago, the president proposed that within the next 45 days, the intent would be for the U.S. to ban TikTok and WeChat. This event originally meant that the apps would no longer be able to be downloaded from app stores within the United States. New updates couldn't be made, and that restrictions on data sharing would be firmly in place at that point. So that was the original goal 45 days ago when President Trump rolled out this latest of his bans of all things Chinese, anything that he disagreed with. And this is certainly, the rulings have come down in the last week separately for both TikTok, that the deal was originally given blessing by President Trump to allow Oracle and Walmart to have a controlling stake in the company for their U.S. operations. And it answered the national security concerns over data sharing. And from what I've shared with you in the past, as you know, this is the data sharing piece of this is the real driving force of both the bans on WeChat and TikTok, which do have a real foundation. And unlike many of the other national security concerns that get thrown up by this administration to justify certain actions, and we'll get to another one of those when we start talking about DS in a little bit. But with TikTok and WeChat, talking to colleagues who work in State Department who have some behind-the-scenes knowledge about these kind of issues. The problem is because of the national security laws in China that force Chinese companies to share any data with the Chinese Communist Party, with the government, personal data from its users. That's the piece that was objected to by the U.S. and that was addressed apparently in this Microsoft, or not Microsoft, but Oracle Walmart deal to buy TikTok's operations here. So that's encouraging. What's happened though is interesting. The CNN Business had an article this past week that from two prominent Chinese media outlets, the China Daily and Global Times, that are both Global Times, which are both state-run publications, that blasted the arrangement between Walmart and Oracle to purchase TikTok. It would give they were blasting it because it would give American companies some ownership in the short form video app. So they were calling it dirty and unpalatable, intended to keep TikTok, the deal that was made in order to keep TikTok operating in the United States. And so one of the editorials in China Daily had it compared to what the U.S., quote unquote, what the U.S. has done to TikTok is almost the same as a gangster forcing an unreasonable and unfair business deal on a legitimate company. China Daily wrote in an editorial published Wednesday, which called the deal dirty and underhanded trick. So that's quite interesting to hear that coming from a state-run Chinese publication on how they're viewing the TikTok deal that came out last week. Trump, since President Trump gave his blessing to it, that what the new U.S. entity called TikTok Global will be partially owned by ByteDance. That's the Chinese, an original Chinese company that started the app. But ByteDance would hold 0% of the company to be created by the deal to run the app outside of China, and that's the main concern. And certainly, we also have shared how India had banned TikTok because of data sharing concerns, and that this is meant to address this kind of an issue. So interesting to see that because and a quote here from China Daily, if TikTok, it seems as if TikTok can remain in the U.S., but only if ByteDance allows Oracle and Walmart to effectively take over the company in terms of their non-China operations. China has no reason, China Daily added, China has no reason to greenlight such a deal. So it's really interesting that, and they also, in the Straits Times, the Global Times, excuse me, also commented it's hard for us to believe that Beijing will approve such an agreement. TikTok extortion deal is unpalatable gambit is the second piece that came out in that. So it's really an interesting push and pull within state-controlled media and Chinese companies trying to do business in the United States. So that's certainly a piece of the puzzle that when we look at TikTok, certainly that's going to be an important piece moving forward. That if I don't know whether the creation of this ByteDance Global can be needs the approval of the Chinese government. That's not up. I would assume that's not up to them because it's not has no impact on their. They're probably complaining because that's the data that they, in the end, really want is the personal data of users. And whether the personal data of users' viewing habits on particular videos means anything to them, or how that would be used, those are questions for another day. But certainly that's the national security concern that was addressed to allow this buyout to happen, or the creation of this new company, ByteDance Global. So it will be interesting to see what happens with that moving forward. Now, on the flip side, a judge has, related to WeChat, this was the ban that was supposed to be going into effect last week, but we did have a federal judge step in to block that presidential order banning WeChat downloads in the U.S. So the reprieve has happened there, and the group of U.S. WeChat users who were would be affected by that potential ban had shown serious, quote unquote, serious questions in their claim when that was upheld by the judge against the ban, that the executive order threatens users' First Amendment rights. And that certainly makes a lot of sense because it's for the and the comment here is the plaintiff's evidence reflects that WeChat is effectively the only means of communication for many in the community, not only because China bans other apps, but also because Chinese speakers with limited English proficiency have no other options than WeChat. And there's also, WeChat is a kind of a Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, PayPal, Uber all-in-one app in terms of what it can do. And that's certainly for the Chinese community in the United States, those U.S. businesses that are trying to use WeChat to reach Chinese audiences directly for business purposes, including universities, that would be prohibited by this action if WeChat were banned. So though the national security implications certainly are still out there in terms of how WeChat shares user data with the Chinese government, or has to share if ever asked. We don't know whether they have or not. But that's certainly the WeChat ban has been stayed, and it does it blocks the judge's order blocks the Trump administration's attempted ban on downloads of WeChat, but also blocks the government's effort to restrict internet infrastructure companies from carrying or hosting WeChat's internet traffic. So that allows for the downloads and any updates to continue. So interestingly, with the WeChat, we see that one of the articles pointed out for both TikTok and WeChat that in order for, if these bans had gone through, it would require users to use VPNs to access those, so to mask where their devices that would be using these apps are located. So for those unfamiliar, in China, in order for them to access our main social media platforms that are available most all other places in the world, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Google even, those are banned in China. So you need a VPN, a virtual private network, to access those in China. So sort of the reverse would have to happen here if these bans were upheld, that users in the United States would have to have VPNs to mask where their devices are to access TikTok or WeChat in the future. So really an interesting battle how that is shaped up, and it's certainly not over yet, but we'll certainly keep our eyes on it as it impacts certainly U.S. institutions that are recruiting in China are certainly going to want to know about where these two future of these two apps stands in terms of their ability to use them to reach in their targeted audiences. So next up, we switch gears to probably one of the last major things that this current administration is trying to do to further box in and limit international students and immigrants in this country. And this is a real one that sticks in the craw for a lot of international educators that are, frankly, we thought the travel bans in the summer over the last 4 years were a challenge. We thought some of the problems with OPT, the threats to OPT that are still being talked about but haven't yet presented themselves. Maybe that's an election day surprise or election week surprise we have yet to look forward to. But when you think about it, this proposal to eliminate duration of status. Now, unless you're a designated student advisor or an RO on your campus, responsible officer on your campus, you really probably are not familiar with these terms. But duration of status really impacts a non-date basically that's given to F1 and J1 students unless they're on a 2-year home residency, where that once they enter the country on their used to be on their paper I-94 and on their I-20s and in their passports, they would get a stamp that says F1 DS or J1 DS. And DS stands for duration of status, and that meant that international students in the country on visas, J1 or F1, there's a length of time that they normally need to complete their degree that's listed on, or their program that's listed on their documents, or I-20 or DS 2019. But then they are also permitted to do extensions, extension of stay to allow them to expand by a year or a semester, depending on the time that's required to finish their degree. What this DS proposal is, frankly, eliminates any flexibility that a student would have to enter the country, to start a program. They basically have to, if they don't complete the program within that initial 4 years, which is a maximum that is put out there as part of this proposal, and that applies to a maximum for undergraduate and doctoral studies, and a maximum of 2 years for associate's and master's degree programs. So unless a student can complete their program within that time, they have to file for an extension of stay, which previously it's done by the DSOs. They issue a new I-20 for the new program, and then that gets filed, and there's no adjustment needed to visa status. And this is a real challenge because the visas are for a number of reasons. The U.S. has a fairly complex system when it comes to visa issuance and visa status. Those are two different things. So the State Department obviously does the initial visa issuance at their consulates and embassies overseas, and then you see the visa status, you're maintaining your status is monitored by Department of Homeland Security. So in effect, the length of a student's visa in the past, that was only ever important. A student could be in the country with an expired visa, say because of reciprocal agreements. Students from one country coming to the United States only got a 2-year visa, even though the program is for 4 years. They would only get a 2-year F1 visa. That's a stamp in their passport that only is relevant for entry purposes. So they could be in the country after that 2 years and still maintain their status as long as they were maintaining legal status in their studies. But now what's happened with this proposal, if and when this does get implemented as is, it would require any student who is in their final year of studies that is not going to be able to finish final semester will need to file an extension of stay. And that has to be filed with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, same folks that do the evaluation of any students applying for change of status or OPT, STEM OPT as well. Ones that have already been backlogged in those areas, given all the challenges that they've had with staffing and such over the last last 2 or 3 years. So you see that being an impact where any student who isn't able to finish their program in the designated time will have to apply and pay money over $450 to to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in order to file an extension of stay claim, which may or may not be approved and may take months. We don't know, that's all unknown at this point. It also would require someone who wants to take advantage of CPT or OPT that will extend their time to file an extension of stay, in addition to filing documents. CPT is an all in-house process, at least right now, but that would impact the end date as well. With a student who's coming to their end of their degree, wants to take advantage of OPT, they need to file an extension for the period of their OPT, as well as applying for OPT. So it's really putting students in a heavily burdensome environment, newly heavy, even more so burdensome requirements. Administrative requirements to maintain their status. And that's just for immigration purposes. So if you think about other things like driver's licenses and other state IDs that students are issued right now, those are only issued for limited terms. Usually it's the term based on their I-20 end date, program end date, or and now what would be their I-94, virtual I-94, that would have that 4-year or 2-year limit. So it's really a lot of international student advisors are off just at their end of their rope on this one, just feeling this just being another insult to them. NAFSA's come out with some strong words on the policy, and Esther Bremer, the current CEO of NAFSA, says to put it clearly, this is simply bad policy, and she has it puts a huge administrative burden not only on the international students, but also on their institutions that they attend. So it's a real challenge. And in addition to the NAFSA's comment on the DHS policy, there's a great summary of some of the core issues that Karen Fisher from the Chronicle has put out this week in her Global Latitudes e-newsletter comes out on Monday. So she's got some great contacts in there that are helpful. I also want to give a real quick shout out to Tyler Morkin at Central Michigan University. He's done a great job in summarizing these, and part of this period is it was proposed. It was a 30-day period that was put out for public comment on the new proposal, and he's just had a gangbuster summary of some of the key issues involved. And if you're a member of the ISSers United Facebook group, he posted kind of the main concerns he has. He's with the proposal, and he's addressed some key areas in here. And I'll just highlight what those are. Eliminating DS is unnecessary, punitive, and does little to safeguard national security, which is one of the main grounds for the elimination. The 2-year admission window is too narrow, applies to too many students, and is overly burdensome. The E-Verify allowance restriction is arbitrary and irrelevant to F and J non-immigrants. The I-94 end dates should reflect I-20 program dates with no limits. Existing procedures already provide a check on this. Prohibition of CPT while NEO extension of stay is pending will create roadblocks for program completion. Limitation of 2-year lifetime language study is insufficient for many students. And extension of stay, extension criteria are overly restrictive and rooted in faulty assumptions. So way to go, Tyler. Just a great job putting this all together in language that will be understandable for any ISS person, but also has the government speak that they will need to see. So way to go, Tyler, and keep up the great work there at Central Michigan. Now, there's a lot more to come, obviously, on DS after the public comment period's over. We'll certainly keep you in the loop on what's happening there. I do want to shift gears finally to talk about context, global context for what we're talking about with international admissions right now. We've been talking, there were doomsayers in the United States that were saying, particularly Stuart Anderson at Forbes, that was saying that the United States could have for the lowest new international student numbers since post-World War II. And he was predicting 98% of international students wouldn't be able to show up, worst case scenario. Clearly that hasn't been the case. We were helped, of course, in the US by 90%, roughly 92% roughly of current international students that stayed in the US, maybe not on campus, but stayed in the US after the pandemic broke and all colleges went online. That allowed us to maintain those current students who have been able to continue to enroll, whether online or in person or hybrid. So that was a plus for the United States moving forward. And then looking at the early numbers, we don't have comprehensive numbers yet, obviously way too early for that. But we look at a new report from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center that was released on Thursday that took an overall look at enrollment trends for this fall. And for international students, was a drop of 11.2% for undergraduate and 5% for graduate. And this is, frankly, I'm pretty happy with. It's given the worst case scenarios that we were talking about. We were looking at ACE was talking about 25% loss. NAFSA was talking about 25 to 35% loss of international student in the United States this fall. That's clearly not been, from these early numbers, not been as dramatic a difference as we might have thought. We look at Canada. They're actually have, if you want to be honest about it, they actually have a more restrictive immigration program right now for international students. They're not allowing them back in yet. And if their campuses, even new or returning students, cannot study online there. If their campuses are online and they're not required to be on campus, they can't come in to Canada. So different from the U.S., actually more restrictive than the U.S. We look at what's happening in Australia. In Australia, they have gone from in 2020, they went from 60,000 international student visa holder arrivals in March. That was the last time that the doors were still open, to 30 in April, 40 in May, 60 in June, 40 in July. So their numbers have dropped off a cliff. The 99% drop in their new incoming international student rates. So though many of them are still studying online, in the U.S. we're only down 11% in undergrad and 5% in grad. Canada, too early for their numbers, but they're going to be down. UK is coming out rosiest in this. For all the hand wringing about what they were going to experience, we've seen them only actually have a 9% increase. They've had universities that have chartered planes. They've had a huge social media campaign to help support what they were doing as a safe destination. They've had, obviously, still riding the wave of the re-implementation of the 2-year post-study work visa. So there's been a lot of positives that the UK has seen. But in the global context, we're not doing as bad as we could have been. And compared to some countries, New Zealand still hasn't let in international students since March and has no plans to do so till January at the earliest. Australia is still not readmitting students yet. Canada is not admitting new students if they're online. So there's a lot of challenges out there, and the U.S., frankly, given everything that's happened, is doing a lot better than we could have been, or at least some naysayers were predicting we were going to be. So we'll keep a sharp eye on what's going on with all of these stories, but wanted to get these out to you today and hopefully give you some food for thought as you take these back to your campuses and have these important conversations that need to be happening. So we hope that you enjoy this week, and we look forward to catching up again with you soon. Cheers.